They dragged him out of his car, slammed him with false charges until he exposed who he really was. Late at night in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the streets were mostly quiet, save for the occasional hum of traffic lights flickering from red to green. Jamal Winslow, a seasoned assistant U.S. attorney, had just left a dinner with colleagues. He wasn't thinking about work, injustice, or courtrooms, just home. That changed the moment he saw flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Sighing, he signaled, pulled over, and reached for his wallet. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a light. There was no reason for a stop, but he knew better than to assume reason had anything to do with it. Two officers approached his window. Officer Kyle Driscoll, tall and broad with a military cut, stood at the driver's side. Officer Brent Kessler, leaner but no less imposing, hovered near the passenger door. "License and registration," Driscoll said, his voice clipped. Jamal handed over his documents. "May I ask why I was stopped?" Driscoll glanced at Kessler before answering. "Your taillight's out." Jamal frowned. That was a lie. His car had just passed inspection, and the reflection from the rearview mirror showed his brake lights fully functional. "Are you sure about that?" Jamal asked, keeping his voice even. Driscoll's expression shifted just slightly. He leaned in. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." A slow tension crept through Jamal's limbs. He'd prosecuted cases like this before, where a routine stop became something far worse. His instinct told him to comply, but his experience told them these officers were already escalating. "I'm not stepping out until you tell me why." Kessler smirked, resting his hand on his belt. "Because we said so." Jamal took a breath. He knew the law. He had spent years studying, enforcing, and defending it. He knew he didn't have to get out of the car unless there was probable cause. "I'm within my rights to ask why I'm being ordered out of my car." Driscoll's patience snapped. He yanked the door open. "Step out, now." Before Jamal could react, Driscoll grabbed his wrist, yanking him forward. The seatbelt caught his chest, digging into his shoulder. "What the hell are you doing?" Jamal barked, instinctively pulling back. Driscoll didn't answer. He just grabbed harder. Within seconds, Kessler was on the other side, wrenching Jamal's arm behind his back. The sharp edge of metal cuffs dug into his skin. "You're resisting," Driscoll said coldly. Jamal stared in disbelief as Kessler pressed him against the hood of his own car. His heart pounded, but not from fear, from rage. This was a game, a setup, and they thought they had already won. But they were about to realize just how wrong they were. The courtroom in East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse was packed. The air was thick with routine, clerks shuffling papers, the occasional cough, the quiet hum of whispered conversations. But beneath that, something else simmered. Jamal Winslow sat at the defense table, his posture rigid but composed. He wasn't here as an attorney today. He was the defendant. The charges: resisting arrest, obstruction, disorderly conduct, complete fabrications. But Jamal already knew. The truth didn't matter, only what could be proven. At the front of the room, Judge Margaret Holloway peered down from the bench. In her mid-60s, she had the kind of presence that commanded authority, whether it was earned or not. Her reputation: firm, uncompromising, dismissive of nonsense. And from the way she barely looked at him, Jamal already knew where this was going. The prosecutor, Richard Calloway, walked with confidence, the kind of confidence that came from knowing the odds were in his favor. He straightened his tie and nodded to the officers sitting proudly at the witness stand. Jamal watched as Driscoll and Kessler sat smugly, knowing they had the full weight of the system behind them. "Your Honor," Calloway began, "this is a simple case of an individual escalating a routine traffic stop into a physical altercation with law enforcement." Jamal exhaled slowly. The arrogance, the audacity. Calloway continued, flipping through his notes. The defendant refused to comply with officers' lawful orders, became aggressive, and had to be restrained for the safety of all involved. Jamal's lawyer, Thomas Rivera, an overworked and underpaid public defender, shot up from his chair. "Objection!
There is zero evidence that my client was aggressive." Judge Holloway waved a hand dismissively. "Overruled." Jamal clenched his jaw. That was fast. Rivera sighed, but pressed forward. "Your Honor, the officers escalated the situation without just cause. There is no body cam footage showing my client acting aggressively, because no such footage exists." Calloway smirked. "Body cams were not operational at the time of the arrest, but the officers' statements are more than enough evidence." Jamal almost laughed at the absurdity. The officer's word was all they needed. Convenient.
Judge Holloway barely hid her impatience as she glanced at Jamal's lawyer. "Anything else, Mr. Rivera?" Rivera hesitated. He knew this judge, knew her track record. She wasn't interested in fairness. Still, he swallowed hard and pushed forward. "Yes, Your Honor, the defense calls Jamal Winslow to the stand." This was it. As Jamal rose and walked to the witness stand, he could feel every pair of eyes on him, watching, judging, waiting to see if he would break. But he wouldn't, because what was about to happen would change everything. Jamal sat in the witness chair, exhaling slowly as the court clerk swore him in. His hands rested lightly on his lap, but inside, he was simmering. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to expose the truth. Prosecutor Calloway stepped forward, pacing just slightly, an unnecessary display of confidence. "Mr. Winslow, would you say you complied with the officer's instructions during your traffic stop?" Jamal met his gaze, calm, controlled. "I asked why I was being ordered out of my car. That's not illegal." Calloway feigned a sigh. "You refused to exit, correct?" "I asked why I was being asked to step out," Jamal repeated, "which legally I have the right to do." Calloway smirked, glancing at the jury as if Jamal's intelligence was an inconvenience. "And after multiple orders, you still didn't comply." Jamal held his stare. "Because there was no lawful reason to." Calloway turned to the judge, shaking his head as if he'd expected nothing less. "Your Honor, it's clear the defendant—" Jamal leaned forward, voice even. "Before we go any further, I should probably disclose something." Silence. Calloway hesitated. Even Judge Holloway looked up, actually looking at him for the first time. Jamal reached into his briefcase, his lawyer, Rivera, tensed, unsure of what was happening. Slowly, Jamal pulled out his badge, a small, simple rectangle that had suddenly become the most dangerous thing in this courtroom. "I'm Jamal Winslow," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District." The room froze. Judge Holloway's lips parted slightly, her gavel hovering over her desk but unmoving. The officers stiffened. Kessler's knee bounced under the table. Driscoll's jaw went tight. Calloway's face went pale. Excuse me." Jamal tilted his head. "Did I stutter?" The air shifted. The jury leaned forward. The stenographer stopped typing. Even Rivera, his own lawyer, looked like he'd been hit by a freight train.
"You're a federal prosecutor." Calloway's voice wavered just slightly. Jamal lifted his ID. "That's what this says, doesn't it?" And just like that, the entire case imploded. Judge Holloway sat back, her mouth pressing into a thin line. She knew if she ruled against Jamal now, if she dismissed his testimony and sided with these officers, this wouldn't just be another forgotten case. It would be a scandal. The courtroom wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a powder keg, and Jamal had just lit the fuse. The courtroom wasn't breathing. Judge Holloway's grip on her gavel tightened, but she didn't slam it down. Not yet. She was thinking, calculating. This wasn't just a routine case anymore. This was a career-ending disaster waiting to happen. Calloway swallowed hard. His confidence, the smooth arrogance he had worn so easily, was gone. He turned to the officers, and for the first time, Driscoll and Kessler looked nervous. Jamal sat there watching the silent scramble for control. He'd seen this 100 times before, in boardrooms, in back-office meetings, in hushed conversations between prosecutors, when the wrong kind of case landed on their desks. But this time, he was the one who forced their hand. I wasn't aware of this information," Calloway stammered, flipping through his files like a man searching for an escape hatch. "Your Honor, Judge Holloway raised her hand, silencing him for the first time. Her eyes locked onto Jamal's. His presence alone was now a threat. A government prosecutor, wrongfully arrested, assaulted, lied about. Had this gone unnoticed, he could have been another nameless statistic. And she knew it. She turned to the officers. Driscoll, Kessler, both men sat up straight like children about to get scolded. Would you like to amend your statements? Silence. A crack in their composure. Jamal could see it happening. Driscoll's fingers curled around his knee. Kessler looked at Calloway as if hoping for a lifeline. Jamal spoke first. Before they answer that, Your Honor, I'd like to request that the court pull the dispatch call logs from the night of my arrest. Calloway flinched. Jamal wasn't guessing. He knew how these things worked. If those officers had radioed in before the stop, their lie about the tail light wouldn't hold. If they hadn't, then they had violated protocol from the start. Judge Holloway studied him for a long moment. She was trapped. If she denied his request, she was burying evidence. If she approved it, she was handing Jamal the final nail in the coffin. She cleared her throat. Request granted. Driscoll exhaled sharply, his composure finally cracking. Kessler shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched. They knew what was coming.
Jamal leaned back in his seat, and he wasn't finished yet. Because this case wasn't staying inside this courtroom. It started with a single reporter in the back of the courtroom, a young journalist from the Baton Rouge Advocate furiously typing on her laptop. Within hours, the story spread. By the next morning, Jamal's name was everywhere. Assistant U.S. Attorney wrongfully arrested by Baton Rouge cops. Federal prosecutor exposes corrupt officers in open court. Judge under fire for bias against black defendant. Who was the government lawyer? The internet erupted. Social media was flooded with clips from inside the courtroom, taken by people who had attended the trial. The moment Jamal revealed his badge became a viral video, spreading across platforms like wildfire. Cable news stations ran segments on the case's implications. How many others had been railroaded like Jamal, but without the power or position to fight back? But the biggest shift happened in Baton Rouge itself. Community activists organized rallies. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse demanding accountability. Civil rights attorneys dug into old cases handled by Judge Holloway, looking for patterns of bias. And then the real blow landed. An anonymous leak, internal police records, emails between officers discussing how to justify questionable stops, statements from other black drivers who'd been pulled over, cited for false violations, then threatened with arrest if they argued. The case wasn't just about Jamal Winslow anymore. It was about a system that had been operating in the dark for years, and now the floodlights were on. But the people in power weren't going down without a fight. The backlash was immediate. City officials scrambled. The police department issued a carefully worded statement, and Judge Holloway's office suddenly stopped returning calls. By the end of the week, the Baton Rouge Police Department announced an internal investigation. A weak, performative gesture. Jamal had seen it before. A distraction, a way to pacify the public without making real changes. But this time, it wasn't enough. The pressure kept building. A civil rights attorney filed a federal lawsuit against the department on behalf of past victims. Community leaders demanded Judge Holloway be removed from the bench. Protesters refused to back down. And then the real moment of reckoning came. The case was handed over to Louisiana's Attorney General for review. Jamal sat in his apartment, watching the press conference. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from journalists, lawyers, people who had been through exactly what he had, but didn't have the badge to fight back. This wasn't just damage control anymore. They were running out of ways to hide. And Judge Holloway, she knew it. By the time Jamal returned to court for the verdict, her expression had changed. No more casual disinterest, no more overconfidence. She was staring at a case too big to bury, and she had to decide which side of history she wanted to land on. But would it be real justice, or just another calculated move to protect the system? The courtroom was silent. Judge Holloway cleared her throat.
The weight of the past few weeks sat on her shoulders. The protests, the media scrutiny, the leaked files. She had no good options left. She looked down at her notes, but everyone knew this decision wasn't hers anymore. It was the public's. She exhaled, setting her gavel down softly. After reviewing the evidence, the court finds the defendant. She hesitated just for a second. Then finally, not guilty. A wave of relief crashed through Jamal, but he didn't move, didn't react, not yet. Because the case wasn't just about him. The officers sat stiffly, their faces pale. Kessler's hands were clenched, his career flashing before his eyes. Driscoll, always the more arrogant of the two, leaned forward. "Your Honor, She held up a hand. "The court will also be forwarding all relevant materials to the State Attorney General's office for further review." That was it. The officers weren't walking away from this. The courtroom erupted, murmurs, gasps, the rapid clicking of reporters' keyboards. For the first time, the system had turned its gaze back on itself. Jamal stood slowly. His lawyer patted his back, but his eyes were on the officers, on the prosecutor, Calloway, who looked like he'd just lost everything, on the judge who had spent years dismissing cases like his until she was forced to do otherwise. But most of all, he thought about the people who weren't in this room, the ones who had sat in this very spot before him, the ones who never got to walk free. As he stepped out of the courtroom, the cameras flashed, reporters shouting questions, people cheering. But Jamal wasn't celebrating, because this wasn't a victory. This was proof. Proof of what had always been happening, but only now, with the world watching, had the system been forced to react. And he knew the fight wasn't over. Not for him, not for the people still trapped in it. He stepped past the flashing lights and into the crowd, where voices demanded real change, because one case wasn't enough, and now nobody was looking away. If this story made you think, even for a second, then it's time to ask yourself, how many more stories like this are out there? How many people never get their moment in court? Their names never make the news. Their truth never gets heard. It's not enough to just see injustice. We have to challenge it. So if you believe that real justice means holding power accountable, then share this story. Talk about it. Pay attention. Because the more people who refuse to look away, the harder it becomes for these cases to be swept under the rug. And that's how change begins.